Hey, it's Matt Robison, and here's our latest episode of Political Rehab. This show is kind of a mashup of PTI and The Daily Show, where a Republican named Matt and me, a Democrat who's also named Matt, try to make sense of the week's political news. We hit the top stories, we blast Trump when necessary, which is usually, we do our weekly That's Bullshit segment, and always end with a dose of hope. I'm really happy this episode is going out on the Blue Amp, Cliff's Edge YouTube channel, and on my YouTube, Worth Knowing with Matt Robison, and on my Substack, Worth Knowing with Matt Robison, and other platforms. So wherever you're watching, please hit subscribe to support this kind of work. We could really use your support, especially on the Worth Knowing YouTube. And just so you know, I'm live with you right now, but the rest of this episode was recorded earlier. Here we go.
Means you're not going to build that coalition ever again. And somebody like Vance isn't going to be able to survive.
You predicted this, Matt. You predicted that this was going to be an absolute flaming gas bag of a story.
What it really exposed was how unserious Republicans are and how much it's going to hurt us.
Absolute catastrophe. Public relations, substantive, moral, and legal that Christy Noem created. Matt, why did she get fired now? Welcome to Political Rehab, smart politics without the hangover. I'm Matt.
And I'm Matt.
Today, White House panic over Iran war politics, a new MAGA meltdown, Trump says the quiet part out loud on his cabinet, Clinton deposition fireworks, and a stunning political story building in Texas. But let's start, as always, with our Trump dump.
Time for the Trump dump.
That's right. It's time for the Trump dump, because it doesn't matter if you're Republican, Democrat, or independent. There's something Trump likely did this week that pissed you off.
ProPublica just reported that Trump administration officials met with the same people who tried to overturn the 2020 election, apparently to figure out how to do it better next time. A number of high-ranking Trump officials attended a summit in late February to talk strategy, and I'm guessing molt their skin. The meeting included a White House lawyer named Kurt Olson, who's been assigned the task of reinvestigating the 2020 election all over again, apparently because the first 60 court losses weren't quite enough. Also attending was Heather Honey, real name, the Department of Homeland Security official now in charge of election integrity. And then there were a number of shady characters from Trump's orbit who crawled out of the shadows of shame and felony to attend the meeting. Figures like Michael Flynn, who pled guilty to a felony for lying about secret conversations with the Russian ambassador, and then spent the next few years auditioning to be the general of QAnon, and Cleta Mitchell, the former Trump lawyer, who was on that infamous January 2021 phone call when Trump pressured Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger to, quote, find 11,780 votes to overturn the election. Mitchell resigned from her law firm in disgrace and then, undeterred, launched something called the Election Integrity Network, which should probably win a Nobel Prize. Now, administration officials say this is all perfectly normal. They claim it's common practice for staffers to communicate with outside advocates who want to share policy ideas. I wish they handed out Nobel Prizes for euphemisms too, because sure, it is normal for public officials to meet with advocacy groups. When I was a congressional chief of staff, advocacy groups asked for meetings with our office all the time, and we invited them in to share their views. But if the request had come from the Ku Klux Klan or the Russian mafia, the answer would have been pretty simple. Go away. You don't play footsie with fanatics. You don't give them a seat at the table. That's where the whole White House cover story falls apart, because the very existence of a White House lawyer whose job is to reinvestigate Trump's election conspiracy tells you exactly what's going on here. This isn't a courtesy meeting. This is your government restarting the conspiracy, and the evidence is everywhere. You've got Carrie Lake, who refused to concede her 2022 Arizona gubernatorial loss, now serving as senior advisor at the U.S. Agency for Global Media, the agency responsible for promoting truthful journalism in authoritarian countries. I guess Kanye West wasn't available. You've got Marcy McCarthy, who worked with Cleta Mitchell's Election Integrity Network and now serves as communications director at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, the agency responsible for protecting our election systems. And the list goes on and on. A whole collection of conspiracy theorists, QAnoners, flat earthers, Bigfoot truthers, felons, activists, and election deniers, now embedded at different levels of the federal and in state governments. So the real takeaway from this ProPublica report is simple. Trump is definitely interested in subverting elections, But he's not just trying to relitigate, he's trying to rehearse.
I want to know, what the hell are we doing in Texas? Because the Texas Senate primary may go down as one of the dumbest acts of political self-sabotage Republicans have ever pulled on ourselves in years. This race has already burned through almost $90 million, and we're not even close to being done. Now we're heading to a runoff that will only get uglier, nastier, and even more expensive. Then we still have to get through a general election. To put it all in perspective, all in, Ted Cruz and outside spending groups put in about $115 million for his entire 2024 race, primary, general election combined. Texas has already burned through almost that much just fighting itself. And why? Because MAGA doesn't like John Cornyn. Want to guess how often Cornyn votes with Donald Trump? 99% of the time. That's right, 99% of the time. But apparently that's not good enough, because parts of our party have decided that the test isn't loyalty anymore. You're either 100% Trump or you're the enemy. And MAGA will burn down the entire GOP just to prove that point. Paxton has survived impeachment by a GOP-controlled state house, a federal securities fraud investigation, a slew of ethics complaints. 3 months after beginning his Senate campaign last year, Paxton's wife filed for divorce, alleging an extramarital affair. But that's their guy. That's the guy MAGA wants. And so now we're lighting money on fire. Money that could be helping us win swing districts. Money that could be protecting competitive Senate seats. Money that could actually help us beat Democrats. But no, we're spending it in a Republican primary in Texas because MAGA doesn't care about winning. It cares about the cult and protecting members of that cult. This never should have gone this far. If Trump had endorsed Cornyn early, this race probably ends immediately. Instead, he stayed out of it. Maybe he endorses in a few weeks, but at this point, it doesn't matter. The damage is done. We're in a runoff and potentially hundreds of millions of dollars spent just to win a Senate seat Republicans should never be worried about in the first place. Right now, we're not defeating Democrats. We're busy destroying each other. And that's not strategy. That's stupidity.
As Mr. Burns once said, excellent. And with that, let's get to our rundown. First up, we have to talk about the war with Iran, but we're going to focus on the political aspects, not necessarily substantive war fighting. We're going to leave that to other segments of the show. Early polling is suggesting that Americans are deeply skeptical of this war. According to Politico, Chief of Staff at the White House, Susie Wiles, has been warning internally that higher fuel costs could become a major political liability quickly. Matt, from a Republican perspective and just from your overall analytical perspective, what is happening with the domestic American politics of this war with Iran? Is it hurting Republicans durably? Is it helping Democrats?
Politically, it's complicated. For the MAGA base, it's a betrayal. They're angry. But I think in the short term, if this thing remains short, if we don't, then I think it's a win for Republicans. But if it goes longer, if we put troops on the ground, if more Americans die, then it probably helps Democrats. Unless, of course, they find a way to screw it up. And that is always a possibility. But right now, this thing is so politically unpopular that I think for Republicans, we have to figure out how to navigate a president who said we were not going to do this. And the very real concern that gas prices are, in fact, going up as we speak. And they're not going to come down quickly. And we already have an affordability problem. And gas prices has been that one issue that Trump pointed to in the State of the Union. He pointed in other places. They're coming down. Look at how great we are. They're coming down. And there's only a few tools in that toolbox that could lower them for the short term. But long term, this is politically dangerous for Republicans. And as we'll talk about much later, in what is going to be an ugly political environment for Republicans, this could potentially be that death nail for us.
The nutshell version of this is it isn't bad right now because voters' memories are awfully short. By the time the midterms come around, this may be well in the rear view. But every single day that this goes by, it becomes more and more of a political liability for Trump and the Republicans. And there's every indication that this is going to be an ongoing source of distraction and problem for Republicans for months and months to come.
And one of those distractions is our next topic, the MAGA meltdown. Before we get into the discussion, I want to play a little video for you of what Marjorie Taylor Greene got into.
He already said to the New York Post today that he doesn't care about the polling. He doesn't care about what the American people think, and he may put troops on the ground. What is happening to the man that I supported, the man that said no more foreign wars, no more regime change, promised it on the campaign. J.D. Vance promised it. Tulsi Gabbard promised it. All of them promised it. And we're a year in, and we're in another fucking war, and we've got American troops being killed.
This video goes on, I think, for 15 minutes. It is damning. It really gets at the heart of where MAGA is feeling right now. They are in complete meltdown mode. Matt, what do you make of all this?
It continues a pattern that Democrats have been living with painfully for years now. It's even been lampooned on Next Week Tonight, where John Oliver says, "We got him, we did it," and drops a banner. And it's every time it seems like Trump is in trouble or his MAGA coalition is cracking. It doesn't quite pan out. But the signs have been building that this time is potentially a little bit different. You have Tucker Carlson calling the strike in Iran absolutely disgusting and evil. Megyn Kelly said on her podcast that American troops shouldn't die for foreign interests, criticizing the entire justification for the war. Conservative commentator Matt Walsh also blasted the administration's messaging, saying he can't take the gaslighting. I would like to pair that with emerging polling from Navigator Research showing that 12% of self-identified MAGA Republicans now regret their vote in 2024. 23%, that's nearly 1/4 of all non-MAGA Republicans, people like you who don't consider themselves to be MAGAs, but are still self-identified Republicans. Almost 1/4 of them now regret their vote from 2024. That is a crack. That is an unimpeachable sign of a crack in the Republican coalition.
It shows just how fragile this coalition really is. And Trump and others like to say, we won. And so therefore there's this big, great wave that says I can do whatever I want. The reality is there were a lot of factors that got to that. But part of it is he brought in some voters who thought we were not going into war, that we would never go into war. Caroline Leavitt and the White House have come out and said Trump is MAGA. What this really hurts is J.D. Vance. It really means you're not going to build that coalition ever again. And somebody like Vance isn't going to be able to survive.
Trump himself has said, I am MAGA. He has defined it as it's whatever I say, it's whatever I want. But he's really stress testing it. You've got the Epstein files, you've got the war betrayal. We're really testing in real time how far he can push his own coalition. The hottest news coming on Thursday was the firing of DHS Secretary Christy Noem, who had apparently run out of excuses, lies, and dogs to hand to her boss. This comes on the heels of the Inspector General for the Department of Homeland Security actually sending letters to the head of congressional committees saying that Ms. Noem had been blocking his investigatory efforts. That came on the heels of revelations that a firm connected to Noem's political allies had quietly received a $220 million PR contract for a campaign promoting immigration enforcement, which it seems like Christy Noem may have been getting kickbacks out of. And all of that comes on the heels of the absolute catastrophe, both public relations, substantive, moral, and legal, that Christy Noem created over the course of the last year plus, most recently in Minnesota. Matt, why did she get fired now?
She should have been fired a long time ago. She's taken the greatest issue Republicans have had in generations on immigration and completely fucked it up and just made it toxic for us. Trump rewards performance and her performance on TV. And in front of the committees over the last few days, she's been a disaster. She's alleged things about Trump, like he approved these ads, it directed her to do it. As a conservative, I certainly don't want to see $220 million being spent of taxpayer money on campaign ads. It's a waste. It's an abuse. I think Bondi could be next. There's a House committee with 5 Republicans that subpoenaed her. We may see multiple firings at this point.
There should be. This also comes on the heels of the whole ridiculous thing where her boyfriend, Corey Lewandowski, tried to fire a pilot because he took her blankie. Then they realized they needed the pilot to get them home. And so they unfired him. Her The old saying is, it's not the crime, it's the cover up. Not only did she have this scandalous situation unfolding with the contract, but then she tried to cover it up. And then on top of all that, she blamed the boss. She said, oh, no, it was his fault. He said I could do these things. And he's, don't get me into this. I got my own problems, Christy. Absolute good riddance. By the way, I will say that Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey, had the line of the week when asked if Senator Mark Wayne Mullen, who is taking Kristi Noem's place, would be an improvement. He said, given what a disaster she's been, it's hard to see anyone not being an improvement. By the way, don't you love how all of these Trump disasters come in? This is like Elon Musk. They're like seagulls. They come in, they flap it, they poop all over everything, they fly away. That's what Doge was. That's what Pam Bondi's doing. Just don't hire these people in the first place, or maybe don't run for president in the first place. That would work too.
This week, there was a release of the testimony of Bill and Hillary Clinton from last week from the House Oversight Committee. Now, in case you didn't watch this, it was an embarrassment for Republicans. I got to be honest here. Hearings became chaotic. Lawmakers are asking questions about UFOs and Pizzagate. I had to temporarily halt after Representative Lauren Boebert posted a video. It's a mess. I always like it when the Clintons squirm, but Matt, what do you make of this?
There is a lot of baggage when you bring up the Clintons. Most people probably have experienced Bill through the prism of Hillary in the 2016 campaign. What's easy to forget is they're fiercely intelligent and they're great lawyers. Both of them exceptional legal minds. And what was amazing about this deposition and this video moment that's kind of gone viral with Hillary Clinton, first of all, pausing proceedings to say to Lauren Boebert, oh, no, we wanted this to be public. You wanted to do this in the Star Chamber behind closed doors. You're not propagandizing this moment. And then the way Hillary was able to take people through step by step. Yeah, we should depose Donald Trump. What about the fact that he has been adjudicated as a sex offender in the E. Jean Carroll case? What about the fact that there are multiple credible accusations of sexual assault against the man? What about all of his connections to the Epstein story? She took it apart logically, piece by piece. You predicted this, Matt. You predicted that this was going to be an absolute flaming gas bag of a story because you're poking at people who are smarter than you. I'm sure you're not the biggest fan of Hillary Clinton. I'm sure you don't share her politics. On the other hand, you agree with me. I'm a Democrat, you're a Republican, but you agree with me that Donald Trump is a clear and present danger to the Republic. And I wish the American people had seen the Hillary Clinton that's on evidence in this deposition, sharp, smart, unvarnished, not focus group tested, just telling it like it is, letting it fly. I think the American people would have voted for that kind of a fighter. I wish they had seen it 10 years ago.
It was almost like it was a trap we set for ourselves. The Clintons are masters at politics. They always have been. And again, we thought we had Bill Clinton so many times, and he always was able to get out. That's why you got those great SNL skits of him calling himself bulletproof. What it really exposed was how unserious Republicans are and how unserious they refuse to take this Epstein scandal and how far it's going to go and how much it's going to hurt us.
Speaking of never learning one's lesson, I'd like to invoke the classic show Arrested Development and the scene where Tobias Funke tells his wife that as a therapist, he sees all kinds of couples come to him saying, I want to open up the marriage. And he says, but they fool themselves into thinking it'll work this time, but it never works. And then he says, but maybe it'll work for us this time. That's the feeling that I get as I see the results of the Texas primaries roll in and the chatter that's starting to build in Washington and around the country that maybe this time Democrats have a chance to win a statewide election and take a Senate seat in Texas. Matt, you are a Republican political consultant. Talk me down because I'm getting kind of excited here.
First of all, Democrats nominated the right person. Tallarico actually has a shot. Now, look, this is a long shot. If I was to place money right now, today, on who's going to win, I would say Republican. But here's the thing. If Republicans nominate Ken Paxton, then this race becomes a little bit closer. Latino voters are leaving Republicans and the political environment. If this thing gets worse, if this war drags on longer, if gas prices go up, it does make this race competitive. And the thing about Republicans is we have decided to make this the hardest possible thing for us. I don't think Tallarico is going to be a United States senator. But what I do think is that it is probably going to cost Republicans an insane amount of money to hold on to Texas. And that is money that we should be spending in other competitive races. And how does that impact Maine? How does that impact North Carolina? How does that impact other races that Republicans need that money to maybe hold on to a majority? The result of this may not be a Texas win, but it may help you take control of the Senate. It will definitely help you take control of the House.
That's a very astute point. And I'll just add, look, there is a fighting chance here in Texas, especially if you guys end up nominating Paxton. Tallarico trails Cornyn by about 3 points in surveys, but he's tied right now with Paxton about 46-46. Democrats appear to have unusually high enthusiasm. They cast about 53% of early primary ballots compared to 47% for Republicans, and Democratic early voting was 274% higher than in the 2022 midterms. I'll also point out that a Democrat won by 14 points in a special election in a district that Trump had carried by 17, a 31-point swing. That is a leading indicator that maybe things may be moving in Texas. On that note, let's change gears and let's go to a deep dive topic that really deserves further examination.
Let's go beyond the headlines. It's time for a deep dive.
We want to talk about a story that is really hot right now, but also has enduring resonance and really matters to the functioning of the republic. We want to talk about war powers. Right now, as we record this, this is at issue in the House of Representatives. It's widely expected that the House will vote down a war powers resolution to authorize the war with Iran happening right now. But let's take a step back. I want to talk about the history of how we decide to go to war in America, who has the authority to take us to war, how that's changed, and how that informs what's happening in Iran and where things will go in the future. The U.S. Constitution deliberately splits war powers between Congress and the president. Article 1, Section 8 gives the Congress the authority to declare war, raise and fund armies, maintain a navy, and regulate the armed forces. Meanwhile, Article 2, Section 2 designates the president as commander-in-chief of the U.S. military. The framers intentionally divided those powers. Having just fought a revolution against a king, they wanted to prevent a single executive from unilaterally dragging the country into war. James Madison wrote in 1793 that the executive is the branch of power most interested in war and most prone to it, which is why the Constitution gives the power to initiate war to Congress. For much of American history, the U.S. generally followed that constitutional model. Congress has issued 5 formal declarations of war: the War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, the Spanish-American War, World War I, and World War II. During this period, the president still directed military operations as commander-in-chief, but Congress formally authorized the conflict itself and also provided all of the ongoing funding and frequently made individual decisions about how we were going to allocate resources in the course of fighting the war. The modern shift began during the Cold War. In June 1950, President Harry S. Truman committed U.S. forces to the Korean War without asking the Congress for a formal declaration of war. Instead, Truman described it as a police action conducted under United Nations authority following UN Security Resolution 83. A decade later, Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution on August 7, 1964. The resolution authorized President Lyndon B. Johnson to take all necessary measures to repel attacks in Southeast Asia. That authorization became the legal basis for the large-scale U.S. war in Vietnam. Many members of Congress later argued that they had effectively given the president a blank check for war. After the Vietnam War, Congress tried to reassert its constitutional role. In 1973, Congress passed the War Powers Resolution over President Richard Nixon's veto. The law established 3 major rules. 1. Presidents must notify Congress within 48 hours of deploying U.S. forces into hostilities. 2. Military operations must end within 60 days unless Congress authorizes them. And 3. A 30-day withdrawal period is allowed, if needed, to safely remove troops. But every president since 1973, Republican and Democrat, has questioned whether the law is constitutionally binding on the commander-in-chief. After the September 11 attacks in 2001, Congress passed the Authorization for Use of Military Force, AUMF, on September 18, 2001. It authorized the president to use force against those responsible for the attacks and any groups that harbored them. Over time, that authorization was used to justify military operations in multiple countries, including Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and Somalia. A separate authorization, the 2002 Iraq AUMF, was passed in 2002 before the invasion of Iraq. Critics argue that these authorizations have effectively allowed presidents to wage a global war without new congressional approval. Today, the U.S. rarely issues formal declarations of war. Instead, presidents typically rely on broad congressional authorizations for military force or their commander-in-chief authority for limited military operations. Now, many scholars argue that over time, Congress has gradually ceded more power to the presidency when it comes to initiating military action, and that raises the question we're seeing in the news today. If the Constitution gives the Congress the power to declare war, why has Congress been so reluctant to use it or to restrain presidents who go to war without it? Matt, I want to turn to that second question first, and specifically the politics of the moment. We are on the verge of Congress once again refusing to rein in the president and assert its constitutional authority to declare war, which is indeed what we are in with Iran. Why, in your view, have Republicans who control both branches of Congress been so reluctant to rein in President Trump?
First and foremost, we have the precedent. You look at someone like Obama, for example. The candidate Obama, the senator, took the position that many Democrats are taking today with Trump that says only Congress can do that. Obama, the president, argued different. And so we have a modern era precedent that's sitting there. But I think the more pressing one that sort of gets to the heart of that question is, and this is the one that nobody can kind of figure out, once the president engages in war, once we've committed troops, you saw in Lisa Murkowski's statement on Wednesday when she released it, is we can't put our troops in danger because there is an American component now to this. And so I think from a Republican standpoint, we look out at this landscape and say, as Murkowski has said, yes, the president should have come to us first. He was obligated to do so, but you can't put the genie back in the bottle. And if we tried, we may cause more harm. And I think that political calculation and that human calculation is why you don't see Republicans rushing to go do that.
I think the difference with the Obama situation is that he still abided by the War Powers Resolution. You have to notify Congress within 48 hours if you're deploying U.S. forces. You have to end military operations within 60 days. We were talking about limited military engagements with that kind of notice to Congress. We're talking about killing Osama bin Laden. We're talking about limited missile strikes in Syria and elsewhere. Never this kind of engagement. Getting to the second part of the question here about why Congress has continually allowed this to happen. From my standpoint, as a longtime congressional staffer, I can tell you that behind the scenes, what inevitably happens is what you described. We get into an engagement, and then it seems disloyal not just to the troops that are in harm's way to try and stand up and say, no, we don't authorize this. You're yanking them back. It's like they're in the middle of an operation right now. So what are you going to do? Tell them don't deploy your parachute after you've jumped? But you also end up in this position where behind the scenes, your White House contacts are pulling them aside on the floor of the House and saying, really? You're going to kneecap the president on this one, president, the leader of your party? You're not going to stand with him on this? And that kind of thing happens all the freaking time. And sometimes it doesn't even need to be said. And so presidents have used that dynamic to keep pushing the line back and back. Now, I think the failure in terms of Congress overall and this Congress in particular is there was discussion about a War Powers Resolution months ago, and Republicans couldn't get themselves together to do it. And that, I think, is because of the particular dynamics of this version of the Republican Party, where the MAGA movement has total leverage over the rest of the party. If they don't show up then Republicans don't win any races. And so you can't live with them, you can't live without them, and you're stuck. You can't go against Trump. Once you've turned on Trump, you're essentially done. So you get this kind of survival of the fittest, where the only folks who are left are the ones who are willing to kowtow to Trump.
I also think there's a couple things that are important for this conversation. One, it's the target. It's hard for people to be against going to war with Iran. There is the case that they are the state sponsor of terrorism.
Yeah, what are you, pro Khamenei?
Right, exactly. The second piece that I think is an interesting conversation. Last year, when we did the bunker busters that, quote unquote, totally obliterated their nuclear capability, this was not some sneak attack. There was not some imminent danger that was staring us down. This has been a slow moving train that we try to have a conversation about diplomacy. And I think where Congress has totally failed, and where, quite frankly, Republicans have totally failed, is that if we have time for diplomacy, we had time to go to Congress. We had time to have these conversations. A real conversation in Congress about the authorization, quite frankly, probably would have made Trump's negotiating hand a little stronger. The willingness, and to show that Congress and the president were on the same page, that they would, in fact, be willing to go after Iran if they did not agree to not have nuclear weapons.
Let's close out on 2 points on this. First of all, we are mostly focusing on the failures of the Republicans because they are in charge of Congress right now. The responsibility is theirs. I will say that there are Democrats who will not hang together on this. There is a role for advocacy groups. They become a bit of a boogeyman, somewhat justifiably so, but AIPAC was taking a muscular voice. And we've seen recently with Tom Malinowski in New Jersey that having it, and again, I can say this is true behind the scenes, having a big money group in your ear behind the scenes, with a lot of pressure on you, that can make a difference with some members of Congress. The other thing that I think we can close out on is a recognition that war powers don't sit alone in the realms where Congress has gradually ceded its constitutional powers. That's been unabated for the last 70 years. Every area where a president has seen the ability to expand his constitutional authority, to expand his powers, to rip that away from Congress, they've taken it. Who wants to give back that kind of power once they've grabbed it? And of course, Trump has gone on total steroids with this. War, tariffs, overreach on elections. The reluctance of Congress to try to claw that back is a broad failure that can attach to both parties. But I think it is fair to say that it is specifically a Republican failure right now.
The founders knew this could be the case. They knew the executive would try to grab more. Every president has, other than Washington. And under this Congress and this president, Republicans have their duties, and they've dishonored that memory of what the founding fathers tried to do. Quite frankly, it's un-American. And that's why I think Mike Johnson really has been one of the worst speakers of the House that has ever existed, because it was his job to hold this in check and to make sure the Republic does what it is supposed to do.
With that, let's get to this week's edition of That's Bullshit.
Bullshit. Bullshit. Bullshit. Bullshit.
A bullshit?
We've taken control.
That's how the Trump White House is presenting the war with Iran, and at the exact same time, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says the media is covering dead American soldiers too much.
When a few drones get through or tragic things happen, it's front page news. I get it. The press only wants to make the president look bad, but try for once to report the reality.
So just to be clear, war should look like a video game, but the press shouldn't talk about the soldiers who die in it. So which is it? Are dead troops too sacred to cover, or is war entertainment now? Actually, we know the answer to that because of some shocking things that Trump has said and done that he's really hoping we all just forget about, and I'll get to that in a minute. But let's start with the fact that this side-by-side gives you a window into how Trump world views the military. War footage edited with Call of Duty footage and point scores to make it seem like an awesome, fun exercise with a lot of kicking ass.
We've taken control.
But don't bum anybody out by talking about the tragic sacrifice that our soldiers are making, or reporting on any of the other human tragedies that go with war, like our war with Iran.
More than 160 children were killed here on Saturday. According to Reuters, a U.S. investigation suggests the U.S. itself was likely responsible for the strike.
The real takeaway here fits into a larger pattern that we've seen out of right-wing politicians and the Fox News media ecosystem for years. When Republicans are in charge, and especially when that Republican happens to be Donald Trump, dead American service members can be used like props. Like when Trump visited Arlington National Cemetery back in August 2024, right before the election, to film video to be used in his campaign, which you're absolutely not allowed to do, and a Trump campaign staffer allegedly shoved a cemetery employee who tried to stop the filming.
Today, the U.S. Army confirmed that a Trump aide did indeed push an Arlington National Cemetery employee as she tried to enforce the rules.
Could your campaign have put out those videos and photos?
I don't know who did it, and it could have been them. It could have been the parents. It could have been somebody.
It was your campaign's TikTok, though, that put out the video.
I really don't know anything about it.
But when Democrats are in charge, Pete Hegseth's former employers over at Fox News demand that the media focus more on military deaths, like their criticism of Joe Biden after 13 members of the U.S. military died in the withdrawal from Afghanistan.
I should say that that we did not hear President Biden mention the 13 fallen.
I don't think that is too much to ask that he would put that into a more than hour-long speech.
And don't even get me started on right-wing media's obsession with the 2012 terrorist attack on the U.S. mission in Benghazi, in which 4 Americans were killed. In the 20 months following those attacks, Fox News' evening lineup ran 1,100 segments, an average of 2 per day on those 4 deceased Americans. Could it be that
The press only wants to make the president look bad?
I'm not trying to pretend that presidents haven't tried to downplay the true cost of war, specifically when that cost is measured in the lives of our military service members for years, or that politicians from both parties over the years haven't tried to manipulate the narrative of war to protect themselves or hurt their political opponents. Of course they have. But we don't need any lectures from the Trump administration about media coverage when the White House is trying to gamify a war, and especially when there's such an ugly history of us knowing exactly what Trump really thinks about members of our military, and he's hoping it's just been etch-a-sketched out of our brains.
That includes saying that John McCain, who spent 5 years in captivity as a POW, was no war hero because, quote, he was captured. Calling Americans who died in wars suckers and losers. Minimizing the traumatic brain injuries troops suffered in a missile strike as headaches. And saying that the Medal of Freedom, a civilian award, is much better than the Medal of Honor because service members who receive this top military honor are often gravely wounded or dead.
We call this series, this segment in the larger Political Rehab show, That's Bullshit for a reason. There's too much of this kind of thing where people in politics try to get away with stuff that denies facts and reality. But the worst version of this kind of thing is when people do that and the reality they're denying is coming out of the other side of their mouth. That's what Hegseth is doing here. And it's obviously bullshit. The fact that he's moralizing about it is what makes it truly grotesque. All right, and as always, let's close out with our dose of hope.
Primary season is here. Now, we've talked about Texas and there's been North Carolina, but what this really means for me is that campaign ads are back. And it's like collect them, the weird ones, the crazy ones, the ones that are so bad that they became accidentally hilarious. Every cycle, some candidate throws a Hail Mary and puts out an ad that is completely unhinged. A few weeks ago, we talked about the ShamWow guy who ran for office. Yes, that ShamWow guy. I can report that he lost in terrific fashion. I think he got 4% and is now suing the GOP because they didn't put ShamWow on the ballot. So that campaign went well. But something interesting also happened in Texas. The Paxton campaign used AI to create an ad showing Senator John Cornyn dancing with Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. And honestly, I love this because here's the dirty little secret about campaign ads. They're all the same. I've been on hundreds of campaign shoots. The candidate walking through a factory, the candidate sitting at a kitchen table, the hard hat, the dinner handshake, the slow motion walk through a small business. And while every ad starts to look identical, positive ads look like a Hallmark movie, attack ads look like a horrific horror trailer. which is why AI might actually make campaign ads better. For the first time, campaigns can create visuals that would be too expensive, too complicated, or just too plain impossible to shoot otherwise. And here's the hopeful part. By October, when Americans are getting absolutely buried under wall-to-wall campaign ads, they might actually look a little different. And if that means fewer slow motion shots of politicians pretending to understand the struggles of working families, maybe we'll get, I don't know, riding a bald eagle across the Grand Canyon or literally wrestling inflation in a steel cage match. That might actually be entertaining. And that's my dose of hope.
English author Samuel Johnson famously said that patriotism is the last refuge of a scoundrel. Donald Trump has spent much of his political career trying to prove that true. In fact, one of the ways you can tell that someone is a scoundrel is if Trump ascribes patriotism to them. It's like a tick. It's his go-to move for some of the worst authoritarians on the planet. He said of President Erdogan upon his election, "I know him well. He is a friend. And I've learned firsthand how much he loves his country." Kim Jong-un loves his country very much. And of course, when Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, in the course of calling him savvy and a genius, Trump also observed he loves his country. He loves his country. And of course, the biggest scoundrel that Trump loves to ascribe patriotism to is himself, which is why he does this weird thing where he gropes and dry humps the American flag on stage. For Trump, it's the ultimate trump card, as if the property of patriotism self-evidently implies virtue. And of course, in his simple mind, that's how we all work. Like we're a bunch of Pavlovian dogs. Press the patriotism button and wait for us to drool. So why is there any hope in this? Because it's not working. Look, Trump's not the first president to cynically exploit the rally around the flag effect to help himself politically. Both Republicans and Democrats have been guilty of that one from time to time. But he's the first to have it fail so spectacularly. Polls show him getting almost no benefit from the war with Iran. And while there's a cynical version of that, where one could say, maybe we're all so miserable from Trump's economy and other domestic disasters that we don't have the energy to get excited for his Middle East war, I think the truer interpretation is that Americans have gotten a little bit more sophisticated. We're not jaded, we're skeptical. Okay, maybe we're a little jaded, but we're not just falling for every piece of political flim-flam. We should be questioning our political leaders, even when they're in our political tribe. It shouldn't just be as simple as hand us a red, white, and blue bouquet, and we say, sure, let's move in together. Anytime the voters in this country are saying, you know what, I've got to think about this, that's a good thing. Because in this country, loving your country doesn't mean bowing down to its leaders. And on that note, for Matt, I'm Matt.